We're only a few weeks away from the U.S. election, and the outcome may have a big impact on the markets. Joining us now to discuss, John Eade, president of Argus Research. John, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks, Greg. Great to be here.
It's incredible that we're so deep into the year now. The election seemed that was so far away, and now it's practically on our doorstep. I know that your shop has done some work on how the markets usually perform through an election cycle. What does history tell us?
So Greg, there's a real pattern that we typically see during the presidential cycle, but that pattern has been broken a little bit this time around. Typically, here in the U.S., the presidents serve for 4 years, and that first year of their term is a good year for the markets. There's a lot of enthusiasm for new energy and new ideas. So you get a double-digit gain generally in the first year of a presidency. In the second year, the bloom is off the rose a little bit. Maybe some of the policies have failed or didn't get through Congress. A lot of times you have changes in the makeup of Congress during the midterm elections. So the second year is a positive year, but only mid-single digits instead of mid-teens. The third year, according to the pattern, is another good year for stocks. And this makes sense because by now, the president is already looking forward to re-election, the election in the following year. So there's probably going to be some fiscal stimulus boosting the economy. So the third year is another good year. And then the fourth year is typically another bad year. Usually there's a lot of uncertainty about who's going to take over, how many changes there might be, what it'll do to regulation, to taxes, to trade policies. However, this year, we're in a bull market heading into the final few weeks of the year. So this is a year that breaks the pattern a little bit, but in a good way.
Yeah, anyone who's long the market, and if the pattern is to be broken to the upside, that is a good way. Obviously, we have so much attention, and rightly so, focused on who is going to take the White House, the presidential election. But you mentioned Congress there. This is important, too. Often we'll see political gridlock in Washington. Now, not great for passing policy, but it is considered to be good for the markets, isn't it?
It generally is, but it doesn't have to be the only outcome or the only result for stocks. First of all, at just a real focus level on who we have running, right? We can look at the track record for the Trump years, and those were generally good years for stocks, average gains of about 15% for the 4 years that Trump was in the presidency. There were swings for sure, but on average, they were good years. But the Biden years, and I'm using the Biden years as a proxy potentially for Kamala Harris, the Biden years haven't been bad either, with an average of 12 to 13% gains. And you look at the 15% gains and the 12 to 13% gains, they're both above the 10% historical average. So you could argue that you've got a decent track record from either candidate coming into the vote early next month. But to your specific point about gridlock, actually the market beating returns have come in the few instances where there was a Republican sweep. So the Republicans controlled the presidency, they controlled the Senate, and they controlled the House of Representatives. Those were on average the best years for stocks. So no gridlock there. But if you just look at the years that a Democrat was a president versus Republican was president, the Democrats outperform. So I think a lot of it, Greg, has to do more with the fundamentals in the market at the time. What's going on with interest rates, what's going on with the unemployment rate, what's going on with stock market valuations and earnings. I think at the end of the day, that's going to be a better focus than what the composition is of the Congress and the White House in any particular year.
That's important and great perspective there. We don't know. It is a close race. Let's run down the scenarios. Trump takes the White House. How do you view that for the markets?
So if Trump takes the White House, there's a good chance that the Republicans regain control of the Senate. It's very close now. The vice president has been giving the deciding vote. So the Republicans probably regain the Senate and hold on to the House. So you have that Republican sweep. And once again, history shows that that's been a market beating lineup. If you just look at the numbers, there are some factors, of course, that make Trump unique in many ways. He's very America first, so that's not going to be great for our trading partners. That's probably going to raise tariffs. That's not going to help our exporters, and the higher tariffs may ultimately lead to higher inflation. On the other side, Trump is probably going to be focused more on lower taxes, and the lower taxes can potentially improve consumer spending, and then lower taxes at the corporate level can improve corporate profits. So those are some of the high-level points about a Trump presidency.
Okay, now let's do a Harris win.
So with Harris, the simple response is to say that Harris is going to look a lot like, how Biden has governed. However, Harris leans a little bit farther to the left than Biden does. And Harris almost certainly will be facing the kind of gridlock that oftentimes leads to decent market performance. So probably the most aggressive of any Harris programs, won't stand a chance to be passed. I think a lot of what we're going to have here is the status quo, with stable tax rates where we are. It's probably fiscal deficits, but I think we get those either way. But I think, Greg, with Harris, it's going to be more of the same like we're seeing today.
Lastly, I want to ask you, John, because it's so close, there's a thought that we're going to go to bed not knowing. Election night, we're going to wake up the next day, perhaps not fully knowing. You go back to Bush versus Gore. That was early in my career, but I do remember it going on for weeks and weeks because, of course, the result was contested. What happens then for the markets?
So that's probably the worst outcome, Greg. We just reviewed who's better, the Democrat, the Republican. That's pretty much a coin flip. So whatever outcome we get is probably going to be okay for the stock market. And I think that's what you're seeing with the rally that we've had year to date. There aren't any big concerns about one or the other wins. But if the election isn't decided for days or weeks or even months, I think that's when the questions are raised about the stability of the system, not to mention the fairness of the outcome. And that's going to bring a lot of uncertainty into the market. And that's probably going to result in some kind of market sell-off. The good news, though, as you know, this has been a big year for elections around the world, right? India, South Africa, France, UK, Mexico. All of these countries have held elections. They've all ended up with results. The countries have moved on. And I think the U.S. is going to fit that pattern too, ultimately.